Good afternoon. I'm obviously Greg Bowker from the Herald, and I'm based here in Auckland. Since I decided to head down the track of being a photographer and not a chef, I've been on some pretty amazing journeys. I transferred from the Herald almost 10 years ago to the day from one of their smaller papers, the Wanganui Chronicle, back in 2000 after finishing my studies in Wellington. Let me give you a little bit of information about the Herald. It's the largest metropolitan paper in New Zealand. It's got a combined readership with print and online of about 818,000 people a day. So if you get one picture in the paper and one online, there's quite a few people looking at your work. On a daily average, people just reading the paper, it's about 566,000 people. So there's still a lot of people looking at your work. And on a Saturday, that goes up to about 600,000. So there's a lot of people looking at the Herald. I work with 10 other full-time photographers in Auckland. We've got 8 of us are based in Auckland. We've got a photographer in Hamilton, one in Tauranga, and another one in Wellington. One of the photographers in Auckland, Babish Martins, just does fashion for the Wednesday supplement. So the other 8 of us are pretty busy shooting for news, sports and features for the rest of the paper. So we're sort of classic Kiwis, jack of all trades. We don't have a specialist field like what happens maybe in some of the papers overseas. Some of them are lucky enough to just shoot sports or just do news or just do features, but we do it all. Personally, I don't actually have a favourite. I enjoy all aspects of my work. I had to say it because one of my colleagues from work's here, just in case he was taking notes. I love meeting new people and being introduced to fresh environments. It's funny how some people don't like being out of their comfort zone, but photographers are a little bit unique and they sort of excel when they are pushed out of their comfort zone. We're very lucky people being photographers, especially for a newspaper. When it comes to news, well, maybe really anything that's breaking, we're usually the first to get there. We can get the closest and we get to see it as it happens, normally from a different point of view from where the public can see it. So we're often at sort of world-breaking events first, and that's actually pretty cool. That's slowly changing now with social media. A lot of us are having smartphones with great cameras, so it's quite an exciting time for photography, full stop. We all do have to stop and think. It's amazing to be able to communicate to everyone through the means of photography. It's a pretty cool medium. It's not always glamorous. We don't have guys in black uniforms lifting trophies, politicians celebrating their latest win, or an Olympian holding their medals. Sometimes picking up your camera and recording the moment that a tear rolls from his father's face after he's learnt of his child's death. The camera is just enough to remove yourself from the moment and hide your own tears. And unfortunately, this happens more often than we think. It's one thing that all news photographers share, is meeting a family at their worst moment. But I haven't come to talk about the bad side of photography and the upsetting parts. My adventures have been boundless since I was armed with my first film camera. I had gumption to burn. It's how I sort of talked my way into my first trip with Niwa before I was even a photographer. I went away with them for a month down to the Campbell Islands. We did a trawl survey down there and picked up some whale watchers and came back, and it was just incredible. It really cemented that I wanted to help communicate through photography to people. During my time at the Herald, I've covered some major events within New Zealand, the Pacific, and I've even managed a trip to America to track down Mr. Zay, who's the father of the little girl Pumpkin who was left in the Melbourne airport. Some things that will always hold a special place in my memory for the Herald are the riots in the Solomon Islands, the Fiji coup, the Australian Tennis Open, and more recently the devastating tsunami that hit Samoa, and the earthquakes in Christchurch. So I'll show you an example of my work from the past sort of 10 years. So it's pretty broad, and we'll just kind of roll through. And if you want to have a talk about any of the images, just pop your hand up or shout at me. So this is obviously the Dean's Homestead from the September quake, that 2010 earthquake that hit Christchurch. Might have been 8 actually. Just a moving moment. We managed to get in there, and they sort of had security guards at the gates, and we spent the day with them walking around the homestead, and it was pretty sad and moving time basically. The reason they had security there is that people were going in and stealing the small bricks that were handmade for the Dean's Homestead as a bit of sort of memorabilia. The poor Deans had, their life ruined. They had the special family billiard table that was up on the 3rd level that they couldn't get down. And the day that we were there, EQC had turned up and they basically said, well, here are the bulldozers, the site's not safe, we're going to knock it down, but you have to say okay. So they had a sort of family meeting, and there were kids coming back from overseas, and they decided not to pull it down that day, but I think it was bound to happen. This is going back a few years actually. This is the mother of Coral Burrows, the young girl that was killed in the Wairarapa. It's a funeral service in Matamata. Unfortunately, most of us don't like going to funerals, but for the big events, it's sort of where the eyes of the people that can't go, and just sort of a little moment before the casket was carried away to a private burial. Sort of a small, I suppose, action shot. The McLaren Falls are near Tauranga, and a young group of kayakers were sort of showing off their skills, popping through this quite dangerous rapid. And he sort of showed off the skill, and it just she sort of drops down another sort of 10, 15 feet and then pops out down here. So he's sort of gone basically, but his head just pops out and you can sort of see a little bit of stress in his eyes. Yeah, there's actually a bridge opposite there that cars can drive over, and for the young, because I wouldn't, but people actually jump from the bridge into the water just after where these falls are, and it must be like 30 or 40 feet drop. It's incredible. So yeah, we things like that. It's just a matter of scouting around and hopefully finding somewhere safe.
Do you get time to compose a shot like that, or is it just
Luck.
luck?
I suppose you do make your own luck. You do get a chance of sort of looking at roughly what's around, and having everything right on your camera. I suppose we're a bit lazy now with digital cameras. We can take a picture and it's basically a Polaroid. We know that the exposure is right. We're not going to blow the highlights out, or it's not going to be underexposed, and it's just going to be this blackness. So we can get those things all right, and then a little bit of luck is his head popping out, but the rest of it, we've pretty much know that that's going to happen. And it's an action situation, so sort of fast shutter speed to freeze the moment, and whether or not you hopefully that all sort of fits in with what your plan is for the final picture. Would have been, you could try and do the same thing with a really nice slow shutter speed, and it'll be all blurry, and hopefully you can pan down with them as well. But he was the only one that did it for the day, so it's just one shot basically. The rest of it, you just can't see him.
I suppose a lot of what you do is fast speed anyway, because you've only got 1 second and that's gone.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, people sort of think, oh, you've got these big flash cameras, and you can take 10 frames a second, so you must just sit on the motor drive and hopefully it captures it. But you can go to the tennis and you can be there all day, and if you try and photograph the tennis sitting on the motor drive, hoping that the ball will be in the picture, you'll pretty much guarantee you'll miss it. So you actually have to really kind of concentrate and watch the flow of the game, and almost sort of look at the player's eyes, and they do slightly open a little bit more just before they hit the ball, and that's when you can click the shutter and you almost guarantee you'll have the ball in every single frame. It's just it's a slow, and it does take a lot of time. This is a little operation, hopefully no one's squeamish, but they were doing an operation at Waikato Hospital, and they let us in briefly before they actually did any surgery. So the needle's just before the eye, and it's all right. This is a little rodeo in near Rotorua, and I think at the time she was 3. I'm not sure, but she did fall off, and she was okay. But it's sort of a classic time of the year for us. So sort of around Christmas, there's normally not a lot of news happening, so the photographers kind of manage to scout out little events that they'd like to go to, and little projects that are around. Rodeos are a classic. There's always something there normally. One of our photographers who's now in Tauranga, Alan Gibson, is a rodeo favourite and always comes away with a generally an award-winning picture from them. So they're lots of fun. Some of the small events are great. There's this a whale stranding that I went to near Whitianga actually. We got a call one morning when I was based in Hamilton, and we heard there was a few whales there, and we sort of raced up the coast, and we got there sort of just as the sun was coming up really, and found this sort of shock. If you've ever been to a whale stranding, it'll takes your heart away. We sort of got there, and this was sort of the scene from as we got down to the beach. There was just an amazing amount of whales had sort of died overnight, but people had been there, and they managed to save quite a few of them and refloated them out. We spent most of the day there, and it was just incredible. So if you ever hear of anything like that going on, it's worth going along and doing a little bit for humanity. It's very cool. I thought it'd be rude not to put in a picture of Prince Charles, seeing as he hasn't been here for a while. But events like this, we generally get accreditation sort of months and months ahead. They make sure that we're not some dodgy guy who's going to try and kill them. Going out onto the base is pretty strict, and we do that reasonably often. For sometimes out at the airport, we have to have our ID checked and that kind of thing. So we're normally reasonably safe people to be around. Classic picture. I was on holiday actually, and I think you'll find most of the Herald guys don't go far without their camera gear. I was driving to a friend of mine's place in the Wairarapa, and just going through the back part of National Park, and it started snowing. It was beautiful, and I sort of thought, well, I should look out for a picture in case work needs something. And then sort of looking for nice, cute sheep covered in snow and fields was a nice idea. And I drove around the corner and saw this. Doesn't happen every day, but I suppose we're being news photographers. We'd be gutted if we didn't have a camera with us. So, and then I suppose that goes back to what we were talking about. I was talking about earlier with people with iPhones, or there's always a way now of people taking pictures. and then this is sort of the opposite, I suppose. We've been out doing a job in Mangere, and we knew the police were looking for a guy. I'd been in the news for a few days, but sort of all of a sudden you see one of the police big sort of Nissan patrol vehicles that are all tinted out with a couple of guys hanging off the side dressed like this. You used to think there's something going to happen. So we normally bring our boss, who knows what's going on, ahead of the news desk. Might be a little bit late to back. Oh, okay, what's going on? I think there's something going on. There's people with guns. Okay, so when we basically chased these guys down the road, we were sort of about 2 cars back from them, and they raided this house. It was just kind of quite a long lens. So it's sort of, we generally have like a 70 to 200, which is pretty good, and a teleconverter in our standard kit. But I think I'd been somewhere else and had a slightly longer lens, so it's quite a big zoom in to get that. It's really, I think it's about a 500 mm lens or something. But the things you come across in the back streets of Mangere. Another day at the races. We get sent to the races a few times a year. Normally it's for horses finishing, and we all enjoy it. It's a nice break from sitting in the office, but every now and then have fashion in the field, and it can be quite busy. But one day, obviously this young lady, the wind wasn't in her favour. We liked it. I don't know if she did. I can't remember where it ran in the paper, but it was a good picture on the day anyway. So, guy going to court in Tokoroa. There was a teacher that was killed. She was found in her house anyway. A few days later, the police caught a guy, and we were sent down to cover his appearance. And in some of the police stations, certainly the smaller ones around the country, they'll lead prisoners from the police station through not a very big area to the courthouse. We were lucky enough that day to get a picture of him. He ended up having name suppression because he didn't have a chance to tell his family that he was in trouble. But because of his name and image suppression, and you couldn't see his face anyway, we were able to run the picture, so we were quite lucky. This is Sir Edmund Hillary's funeral. It was obviously a pretty sad moment for all of the country. A couple of months earlier, I'd been able to photograph Sir Ed at his house, and then I suppose hindsight was able to photograph his funeral as well. We had sort of all of the Herald photographers covering the funeral for both days. It was a state funeral, and this picture was actually taken by a remote camera that is set up right in front of where they were going to walk in. So we'd sort of gone in a couple of hours earlier and sort of weighed down a tripod so it wasn't going to fall on anybody, and then had sort of some remotes that followed the camera, hopefully get a picture in focus kind of thing, because you can't control the focus when you're shooting it remotely like that. This goes back to what you were talking about before about being lucky. I do a little bit of mountain biking, and sometimes not very well, as my colleagues might say, but I'd been out to this course and had a look and sort of thought, I wonder where someone might come off, and there was only one downhill that was pretty simple, I thought. And this guy was coming second, and he started the descent and didn't look very good. And I thought, oh, this could be bad. And he did come off quite badly. He sort of had bounced from further up here onto a large stump and then to here. And we sort of took the pictures, and then I was with a couple of friends, and we ran up, kind of helped him out of the way and slowed down all the other mountain bikers. So, yeah, that is a big cut in his leg too. The Prime Minister. Some people might remember this picture. He was being welcomed onto the Lower Marae at Waitangi a couple of years ago, and he was being, this young lady here is Hone Harawira's mother, and the thing that's quite interesting about the picture is that they're actually holding hands. That was sort of the big talked about moment for that day of the welcoming on to Waitangi.
Just on that, the situation at Waitangi is obviously very politically orientated. Do you keep yourself deliberately aware of what's happening in current politics, just so that you're aware of interesting images related to stories?
Yes, certainly. We've got quite a team of politicians and political writers in Wellington, and they fly up for it specifically. So we'll go up and they'll sort of brief us what's happening through the day, who to keep an eye out for. There's a picture that followed later on that day. I think it was in 2008. That Tama Iti was allegedly turning up to the Lower Marae as well, and that was sort of only 3 months after the raids in the Urawiras. So there was a possibility that the Prime Minister may pass Tama Iti, and that did actually happen. And that was one of those things about making your own luck. Like I'd seen Tama earlier that day, so I kind of hung out with him, hoping that the Prime Minister would walk past, and he did, and they hongied, and that was the next picture for the next day, and it didn't happen again, basically. So yeah, you're right. You do. Hopefully, we keep on top of the news, and we know what's happening and who's around, basically. I didn't get to go to the Beijing Olympics, but this is a picture when Valerie Adams came back to her school at Maclean's College and showed off her gold medal. It's just a nice little grab, something a little bit different from someone biting their medal. This is quite an interesting moment. I talked about funerals in that first picture. This is Halatau Toku's funeral at his home in, I'm pretty sure I'm going to say Mangere again, actually. And we were welcomed into their house, and all of the media were. And we were able to go in, and as you can see, be right next to the coffin. Their tradition is an open casket, and they grieve for a few days. And it's an amazing situation to be welcomed into someone's house like that. We certainly, as Pākehā people, we don't do that, but the island culture is amazing. It's an incredible time and something amazing to go to. Again, out at the races, something, making a picture from nothing. It had been a pretty boring day, and I sort of saw a couple of girls, twins, playing around, and managed to get them pulling, one of them pulling the others here. So this goes back to sort of knowing what's going on. One of our editors, who's actually a sailor, had sort of seen that there was going to be a big storm hit the upper part of the North Island, and he decided to get a photographer and a journalist on the road sort of the day before it happened. So we were able to be in. This is Kaio. Kaio. We were able to be in Kaio as the road shut, basically. And this is shot from a lady's house on a hill looking down, because the whole valley's completely flooded. You couldn't drive a car through there. You couldn't see where the road was. So managed to see someone being rescued from their house. The next day we went back to the same house, and this lovely old lady refused to be picked up by the surf rescue, but she went back to collect some of her clothes, and the water level here was to the bottom board of her house. She had 2 inches of water in her house, so you can see it's receded quite a lot. But good planning on our work's behalf to get us there, basically. Nice welcome to it. We heard about a situation up north. A father and his 2 children had been out hunting in the bush. It was a fairly quiet news day, so we went up into the far north, and just as we got there, we'd heard that they'd found them. They brought the family back. This is the mum, and she took exception to the media being there, and this is the young boy who'd just been rescued. Sometimes we get a little bit too close. We have sort of a rule that if someone isn't old enough to vote, we can't take their picture without their parents' permission. But then I suppose in a public place, like say in this situation here, I wouldn't say open slather because it sounds a bit rough, but she knew that we were there. We'd been there for an hour, kind of thing. I suppose in the street, if there's a young child playing, it never looks good, unfortunately, for a photographer to turn up and start taking their picture. We'll tend to try and find a parent and sort of show some ID that we're from the Herald and this is what we're after. It is a bit tough at the moment, unfortunately. There's just. I think it will, basically. Yeah, it's just we're sort of in a rock and a hard place, unfortunately. No, New Zealand's quite classic, and the law is if you're in a public place, you can photograph anybody you like, as long as you don't defame them. So you could take my picture, and then I could be published in. Say I could be climbing a ladder. Take my picture climbing a ladder. Fool climbs ladder. Well, that may be defamatory to me. So then I'd have every right to sort of go. So we've got a department of work that'll kind of that goes into their domain. If it's on sold, there's quite a lot of terms and conditions that go into that, especially if it's going to be used in editorial or advertising. Yeah, it does get very strict for that. But for general news media, it's a little bit more open, basically. You can't defame anybody. That's the rule of thumb, pretty much. Obviously, all that changes if you go into a private address. So I could photograph somebody from the street in their house, and that would be okay. But if I went onto their property and photographed them, I could then be in trouble. Yep. There's a classic trip. Journalist and I. This is actually the journalist. Climbed Mount Ruapehu, and it was when the story was basically sort of 2 days before the Crater Lake burst. Might have been 2 weeks, but we climbed up there, our own sort of little expedition. Herald reports from the Crater Lake, and it was just an amazing trip, basically. I'd never been there before. And climbed through some pretty cool stuff to get there. Another work trip, the Tongariro crossing. We did a story for a sort of a series through summer, talking about great walks in New Zealand, and that's part of the crossing. No. We do, and I can recall taking an amazing sunset once, and it being run in black and white, and I cursed and swore and sort of thought, well, you know, what was the point? And then the editor quietly pointed out to me that before I started, the paper was black and white anyway. So it is nice seeing some nice bold colour. This is a part of a series of pictures that's actually in the exhibition over there. So a young fella that was born prematurely in Samoa, and it came about from the tsunami. Basically, it put his mum into quite a lot of stress and etc. But she was a New Zealand citizen, and so was her husband. But he was born prematurely. They went away with no travel insurance, and he wasn't going to be able to be brought home safely without assistance from the New Zealand government. And we'd heard about it while we were there, and managed to track them down in the hospital in Apia, and photographed it, and got the story out there for them. The Herald started running an appeal to bring him home, and then the health minister, I think it was Nick Smith at the time, decided that it was a major, and the government brought him home. So it's quite a nice thing, and nice thing to be able to sort of show what the media is capable of doing, certainly in sad situations. Again from Samoa. This family here, they're the parents who lost their two daughters, and it's quite tough being over there. We saw them roughly in the area that we knew they might visit. We sort of held off. There was quite a lot of other media hanging around. We wanted to sort of be the first people to get the story type thing. So we set off down the beach and managed to get a fairly tasteful picture of them while they're grieving. It's pretty tough being in those situations. You know, we've all got family, and we don't like sort of being too involved. Yeah. And I think we're, you know, the Herald are lucky. Like the photographers, all of the photographers that are there, are all sort of have families themselves, and are quite respectful of those situations. So we obviously have a job to do. My boss would kill me if he knew I saw that and didn't take a picture, but I'll do it as tastefully as I possibly can. You know. This is from the state funeral that they had for the people from Samoa. They got this massive pit in the ground, basically. Built these amazing places for the coffins to go into, and then after the funeral that day, that was all covered in and gone. But amazing situation, and weren't very lucky to go to and witness. I don't think I'll ever see that. Hopefully never get to see that again in my lifetime. And this is just out cruising around the island, basically. All this lady had was an old tub that had certainly gone through the wears and tears of the tsunami, running water, which wasn't much, and she was doing her washing. It's an interesting moment, and lucky enough to come across, you know. There's a shot from actually the Auckland Zoo, and it's an amazing shot, amazing place to get photographs actually. The old hippopotamus in the water, obviously shot as low as I could at his level, from the public viewing area. So everyone can get it if they're patient enough. Again, this is obviously at Auckland Zoo. Every now and then they'll give us a ring and sort of say, look, just had a new baby orangutan, I think it is. Not orangutan. Baboon, yes. But and we get invited in, and in those situations we can take a lot bigger lens with us and get a lot closer. And then the same thing, they had some green-shelled snails come in, and we did a little story on them. Do I? Oh, if we say this one here, I'm pretty sure that's shot on like a 600mm lens. It's about kind of this big, and it's really heavy. All of those lenses will use a monopod, just for mobility. But there are some things where we'll use a tripod for those bigger lenses. Some sports photographers actually will use like a 600mm lens and put it on a tripod at the cricket, and they'll just kind of pre-focus and they'll shoot from one end and have the other camera at the other end. So, definitely we're not gung-ho enough not to use them. There's a classic story about that. Kahuis, obviously, sort of back in the news today, but Naskina King, she'd been sort of eluding the media for quite some time, and one of the journalists, Patrick Gower, who now is actually a political editor for TV3, managed to track her down over a few days, and we managed to get a photograph of her with a young girl, which was quite upsetting to see. And then a couple of days later, Chris was found not guilty of the death of the two kids. So this is what I was talking about earlier about photographing when a dad's upset. This little guy here was killed in a car accident on the Auckland motorway. We were invited into his house, and he sort of pulled out a picture of him and started crying, basically. And it's a quick moment, and it's quite upsetting. Back to our friend in Christchurch. Obviously, we spoke about that earlier. Just a random picture of a guy up north. We were doing another assignment up there, and literally just drove past. I stopped and asked him if it was okay if I took his picture, but he was so a little turtle at Kelly Tarleton's. So that's shot with a macro. We all have a little macro lens, so it's it'll focus pretty tight. And this is a looser shot of it. Rugby World Cup. That's shot on like about a 10mm fisheye lens to give it a bit of curving down here and sort of get most of the stadium in. So our evading trophy that we sort of spent so long and so much money to get, which was worthwhile getting. We had sort of most of the team working that night, and I think all of us were so worried about getting our picture, whatever, that it took us until we got back to work to realise that we'd actually finally won the World Cup. Going to the rugby games are amazing, but we certainly don't sit there and watch the game. It's too busy taking pictures and sending them back to work. These are the riots outside the National Party conference in November, sorry. And happened at the same time that they had the Occupy protesters in Aotea Square. So it's not very often you get protesters dressed up, which was nice, something a bit different. The Rena disaster. So I never went down to the initial part of it. I went down later on, and this is shot with sort of about a 30-second exposure just to get some nice kind of waves through the sea, which is kind of just a little bit different. I managed to drag a bit of wood up and prop it in the sand dunes as my tripod, so I didn't have one with me. And then again, just a guy doing some cleanup on the beach. This was a picture I was talking about earlier about the hongi that happened, and then my friend Tama at court. He's a colourful character to photograph. One of the guys from work's got some amazing sort of black and white stuff of him. It's just, his muckles look, you know, he makes a great picture every time you see him. This is actually from this year. One of our latest or new edition All Blacks, Mr. Severe, playing against Ireland. Just a moment, you know. I suppose we get to follow the games and get those sort of peak moments, which is quite cool. Some parents talking to us about the death of their son, and just one of those sort of little moments. And one of my sort of, I think this might be the last one actually, one of my favourite pictures of young Valerie Villi. She'd just been awarded her QSM for sport at Government House, and so had this lovely old man, I've forgotten his name actually. He was in the Maori Battalion, and photographing up there can be pretty dry. They sort of get a medal, thanks very much, and then the sort of next, it's very kind of pragmatic how it's organised, and we don't normally get any sort of standout pictures from it, but I managed to kind of pull them together, and I'm not too sure. I've asked Val a couple of times what conversation they had, but whatever it was pretty funny, and that was the moment from it. So yeah, that's pretty much it really. If you guys got any other questions?
If you're in a public place and someone says no photos, what do you do?
We normally try and abide by it. It's just keep the peace. There's nothing worse than sort of having someone quite disgruntled about it. If it's sort of making a picture, then it's a little bit different. But we normally try and upsetting too many people. If they don't want their picture taken, we'll kind of steer by it.
I really like to use a smaller camera so I'm not stuck in their face. If it seemed to me that if I had that filter at me, I would freeze. You know, do you ever wish that you had something that was...
I think all of us would love to have another option, but generally the Canon cameras that we use are so robust, and the pretty much as weather tight as you're going to get without putting them in a plastic bag, and that's why we use them. Well, I mean, when I first started working for the Whangarei Chronicle, I was using a Nikon F4, and I loved that camera. And ideally, you know, I don't know, maybe I'd still have one, but Canon are amazing cameras, and we certainly don't have any problem with them. So basically, our standard kit. I don't know if you guys have been able to see it from up there, but so we have not like a standard zoom. So it's just a 70 to 200. So it's not massive, but obviously the reason it's so big is because it's got a fast aperture. We have a wide angle lens, which is 16 to 35. Same thing, it's quite a fast lens, 2.8. With a 50, just generally for macro work. It's really good for macro, but for using it as a free 50, it's hopeless. A teleconverter, a flash, and an infrared thing for firing the flash off camera. Sometimes we'll take another flash with me. That's pretty much what I'd leave the office with on any given day. Say if I'm going to court, I'll strip it right down and maybe have 2 camera bodies, a wide angle lens with a flash on it, and then a long lens with no flash, and it can pretty much do anything with that. But if I'm going to something that's set up, so I'm going to interview someone at their house, I try not to go on with a preconceived idea, because I've done that before and it just falls over flat in my face. So I'll try and go on with a blank canvas, and we'll generally photograph right through the whole interview. So we can sort of position someone where the light's quite nice, and then if we need to put some light into it with artificial using flash, we can do that as well. That's pretty much it. Is that sort of?
I was thinking more in terms of getting your position to get a shot when there's other things happening or other photographers around you.
Yep. Hopefully we can get there early. It's classic. I was in a situation in Wellington for the Ewan McDonald verdict, and we had a photographer based in Wellington. He was there, and he was also shooting some video, so he had quite a good position. And my job was to kind of float around and get whatever else happened outside of what wasn't happening right in front of him. But I also had a ladder, and that was positioned so no one would sort of get in the way. So I came back to the ladder and shot from there, and I thought I had quite a good posse. But the desk at work thought someone else did, and we ended up using an agency's picture from it. So we've sort of, with 2 photographers there and an agency that we pay money for as well, we ended up using the agency one, which is a bit upsetting sometimes, and kind of you can dig your toes in about that. So there's never sort of an ideal position, but like you say, you can go to, say the Rugby World Cup was on, there was fixed positions around the field, and we'd kind of choose those and sit there and hopefully wait for the action to come towards us. And sometimes it might happen right in front of you, but the best picture is the guys walking away sort of celebrating after the try, So yeah, that's sort of. But it's definitely an experience thing. Like we'll go to court and we'll see people come out the back door, or you go and photograph the crowd of people waiting to see Justin Bieber, and there's an exit around the back corner, and he most probably will go out that door, so you can go and hang out around there, and you get sort of 2 seconds in one frame of him, and that's really all you need. Yeah, no, we're a pretty genuine bunch. Yeah, that's why they asked me. Yeah, no, we're a pretty genuine bunch. We're all whether or not some of us have got children, so understand the complexities of family and having young children photographed, but we're all human and understand how people may feel when they've had their photograph taken and they may not want it to be. So yeah, we're not a bad bunch.
So if you take someone's photo and they say, please delete that, what do you do?
It's a tough call. Depends what it's for. So say if it's a general, you're in ART Square and someone's sort of like, hey, I don't want my picture taken. You've already taken it and it's pretty good. Sort of, yeah, I'll delete it. But if it's someone who, they've walked out of court, I don't want my photograph taken, too bad, you shouldn't have been at court, kind of thing. I suppose you
could argue that the person coming out of court was innocent, so.
Well, that's true, but I mean, we're not going to do anything defamatory with it anyway. So that's, yeah. I mean, I think it's each situation we sort of do judge. So Photoshop straight off, and I suppose sort of shooting goes into that. Like most of us will shoot raw, just because it saves so much. There's so much information in the picture, and and even say at the rugby, it's a little bit slow. It's slow to process. Obviously, it's hard. It's hard to download. There's a time issue with it. But once it's in Photoshop, pretty much all we'll do to it is what your limitations would have been, say, in the darkroom. So you'll crop it, make sure it's sharp, maybe a little bit of an edge burn, but we're certainly not, taking heads off this person and putting arms on there, and it's very much as you capture it in the camera.
And is that almost like a policy for the Herald, or is that an individual choice?
It's an individual choice that all the photographers agree on, and certainly if anything's digitally manipulated and goes in the Herald, it's done by the artists, and it says digitally manipulated picture. So we'll basically put in what we take pretty much. Camera settings, I pretty much shoot everything in manual. Mainly for the reason, if I try and shoot something in aperture right, I can never get the exposure right. So I shoot everything in manual. I do use a bit of manual focus, but I'm pretty lazy. I've actually got contacts in today, so I find it quite hard unfortunately with my Canon to manual focus.
You don't have to split prisms and stuff.
Yeah, I know, and they were so good. I mean, I loved that on my Nikon. It was awesome. But I don't have that, so I do rely on the autofocus quite a lot. And I've got a Mark IV Canon, so it's sort of the latest and greatest, and I've got the new lenses that go with it, and man, they're sharp. They're so good. Generally, and then you go back to sort of talking about white balance. I do a bit of stuff in the studio at work for fashion, and I roughly know what the white balance is in the studio, so I'll set my Kelvin to that. But say at the rugby, most of the lights there now are pretty well balanced. They do tend to get a little bit blue in the corners. But if you're shooting in RAW, you can correct everything basically. You could have your camera accidentally set on monochrome, do a whole shoot, go back, oh dear, RAW, turn it back into colour. It's all there. It can be a lifesaver. But I've sort of really only in the last few months sort of become a RAW believer. For a couple of reasons. That I've got Photoshop 5 now, which is great. Before that, I had Photoshop or CS2 or something, which I had to do a DNG converter, and I lost a whole lot of information, and it took ages to do, and it was just a nightmare. So the whole process for me is a lot quicker. But like the Rugby World Cup, I shot everything as JPEG, and they were fine. So I try and leave everything as big as possible. But we'll so once we open it in Photoshop, we'll save it as a JPEG, and it goes in then. So we've given them the best that can as a JPEG when it goes into sort of the Herald system. We just couldn't kind of all the raw files. We just, especially like I actually take too many pictures anyway, so they just it'll kind of have a meltdown. I start sort of putting all my stuff in as raw. Yeah, it'll store. Yeah, well, one of our photographers at work, Richard Robinson, who's got some stuff in next door. His computer's sort of stacked full of, terabytes and terabytes and terabytes and terabytes, and it's just, I don't know how much storage is on there, but it's a lot. You do need sort of a shares in Microsoft or something, I reckon. We've got our department's really cool at work. So in Auckland, obviously there's basically 8 of us in Auckland, and we'll all go back and we'll kind of almost sort of debrief at work really. We'll kind of talk about it, and Our boss is pretty good. If if there's ever anything that's a bit too much, then you talk through it. Yeah, we do get to see some horrible things, but I suppose once you kind of, unfortunately, you do get to see them often. But you do, you talk to your mates at work about it, and you kind of, I suppose, get it out of your system that way, really. And look, I mean, if it's really that gruesome, it's not going to run in the paper. So.
Some of those photos, that World Press photo, are pretty horrific.
Yeah.
And they're shocking.
Yep.
And I mean, I've got visions in my mind of photos that were the last year.
Yeah.
And that's just as a viewer, so I can't imagine what it's like as a photographer to see that. To ever get rid of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think those guys sort of, they'll go to Afghanistan or whatever, and they're in it for the long haul. And I suppose they're maybe a little bit different to kind of the press photographer and works for the New Zealand Herald, but they do go through sort of management systems when they get back. I know the agencies do that. If it'll go through your through your email system at home, it'll be fine when it gets to our end. But yeah, I mean, if you see something like the car on fire in Owakuni, give the Herald a ring and get it through. You're not going to become a millionaire or anything, but.
That's the other thing too, is I've missed out a couple of times, and they said they would use my photo if I got in there sooner.
Yep.
Is there a number for after hours or something like that, or is there a way of contacting somebody when you've got something on the spot?
Yep. I mean, the best thing to do, like, email's classic, and it's the Herald runs quite simple. It's just photo, singular, and then NZ Herald.
You just send the photo straight in?
Yeah, send it straight in and say, look, I'm Greg Bowker, just seen this happen. Do you want to use it? It'll go straight through to the picture desk. Yes, so photo at nzherald.co.nz, and then it'll go straight through to sort of our boss, and he'll sort of make a call from there, pretty much. Yeah, that's the best way to get it through.
And how do you know, like, if he runs it, do they always pay for it, or do you have to ask him to pay for it?
Oh, you can just say, whack something in there, so, but, rights managed or something like that. They're pretty good, I think if it's a well-used picture, if it's an amazing picture and it's run really well on the front page, you might get sort of $300-500 for it, but you're not going to be paying your house off, kind of thing. That's unfortunately.
So when you email it, you have to
Is that sort of got everyone's kind of questions covered? Rachel wants to.
Any further questions? You're very welcome to come up and see.
Yeah, come and have
as well.
a yarn if you want.
So if we can please have a huge round of applause. Thank you very much.